Ah, yes, the PS Vita and the Nintendo 3DS. These devices released originally a year apart from each other, the 3DS being February 26, 2011, and the Vita originally releasing in 2012, February 22nd. Almost a year apart from each other. I have so many memories tied to both of these devices. While the Vita I got much later than the original release. I got my first 3DS, let's say in 2013, mainly because at the time I wasn't super into mobile gaming. Not necessarily like mobile gaming as in like, oh, gaming on my iPhone or my iPad, but I mostly just played on my DS exclusively when I could not have access to my Xbox 360 at the time. So I didn't really want to play my 3DS, but then my brother got one and he got all of these games, and he got his in 2012 for Christmas. And he had all these super fun games, Super Mario 3D World or Land or whatever the 3DS one is. He had New Super Mario Bros. 2 at some point, Pokemon X and Y, like all these super fun games, to the point where I was playing on his 3DS more than he was playing on it. To the point where he eventually stopped caring about the 3DS and was doing other stuff, and I was spending most of my time on 3DS, but it wasn't mine. I couldn't ask for games for it because they would be played by my brother, and I didn't like that. Even though I was playing on his device, I'm an absurdly greedy child. And I eventually got my own, I purchased my own 3DS in 2016, if I'm remembering correctly. I bought a Nintendo 2DS in Target, and it came with New Super Mario Bros. 2. It was like that whole bundle that they were doing. It was fantastic. I loved my 2DS, and I eventually upgraded a few years later to the new Nintendo 2DS XL. In that time between like 2013 to 2016, I did have my own 3DS, but that was inherited from my brother. That red one I was originally playing on more than he was. He eventually got the 3DS XL, so I had a hand-me-down. So that was eventually squared away, but still have to have my own. I loved the 2DS, and I loved the new Nintendo 2DS XL, which is my primary DS I use. The Vita, though, I got on, I think, 2018 or 2019. I bought a Japanese import, and I went 50-50 on it for my birthday with my parents. And the Vita is such a cool device, and you could do so much. The games were just so much of a higher quality compared to every non-Nintendo game on the 3DS. Have you ever played Street Fighter 5, I think it is, on the 3DS? It's garbage. But go play like Marvel vs. Capcom on the Vita, or one of the Street Fighter games. They're amazing. Like, it feels like people tried, the game makers really tried adapting their games to the Vita. Really tried their best to utilize all that they could. When it came to the 3DS, they're like, let's just shit out the 3DS version in like a weekend and we'll call it good. But this video is comparing the two. In terms of performance, they are not necessarily the same. It's hard to determine for me which one I think graphically was more impressive. It just really was down to the games, but on average, the Vita's games were far more impressive in terms of scale and size. There are far more like open world type games on the Vita than there was on the 3DS. And even down to games like Minecraft. The Vita version of Minecraft was basically the PS3 version of Minecraft, while the 3DS version was entirely its own thing that is sort of unique, but it has all these other features. But one of the major things the 3DS version of Minecraft had over the Vita was world size. The world size was enormous on the 3DS, which was impressive how they managed to accomplish that, while the Vita version sort of lived and died in its very small, that era's Minecraft, the console editions versions of Minecraft, notoriously very small worlds. And in terms of emulation, they both can emulate roughly the same amount of stuff, just to varying degrees of quality. The Vita has... It can go all the way from, the classics, Atari, Amiga, all of those classic systems all the way up until, I'd say, comfortably the N64 era. You can get Dreamcast to work, but it's hit or miss in my opinion. I have only gotten it to boot successfully into Sonic Adventure 1 once, and then ever since then it just insta-crashes. But I have seen people and reports of it getting to work, and it's not the worst thing ever. N64 emulation is also hit and miss. There are some games that run very well, and it's a very playable experience, but then sort of other games like Super Smash Bros. 64 not being a particularly fun experience because sometimes it crashes, it's really framey, there's a lot of slowdown. So it's not the entirety of the library, in both consoles are victim. Like, I can't get N64 games to run. There are some N64 game ports made by the community, but aside from that, there isn't necessarily a very good option to emulate N64 games. And most N64 games people might want to play have some sort of representation on the 3DS anyways. Like, Star Fox 64 got remade. You could play the DS version of Mario 64, but the original Mario 64 has a bunch of fan-made ports for the 3DS. And a handful, like Legends of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, all made their way to the 3DS in some form. So it's not necessarily the end of the world if you only cared about official Nintendo games. But overall, I think the Vita was the more comfortable experience to emulate games, purely just due to the form factor. But the 3DS felt it had a lot more official support for vintage consoles. Because if you hack your 3DS, you can get the H-Store. And you can download all the Virtual Console games, which covers a very large library of games from all the way back to the Nintendo, all the way up till the Super Nintendo era, including Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and for some people, if you were an ambassador, Game Boy Advance games, which on the H-Star you can download those games. So you can pretty much play the best games in the games you were most likely to play anyways from those generations of consoles on the 3DS already through the Virtual Console or through the H-Store and downloading them illegally. So realistically, it's not the end of the world that the 3DS doesn't have the greatest capacity for emulation when it has official support for so many of these games, opposed to the Vita, where the official support in terms of vintage games was basically PS1 games and PSP games, which, don't get me wrong, those are some fantastic games. They're some of the best games I've ever played were from the PS1 and the PSP. But that's not necessarily emulation, because those were Sony made systems, like, was involved with developing software on the Vita to make it so that those games run basically natively, and to the point where you can even run Adrenaline and be functionally using your Vita as a PSP. But I have, like, you can get the bobbles thing so you can have all your PSP games on your home screen and not have to go through Adrenaline ever. So that's awesome. But as an overall package, I would say the Vita is more initially compelling if you want broad strokes with your emulation. But if you want just the essentials effectively, the 3DS has that more than covered. Moving on to availability, Vitas and 3DSs are roughly around the same price, but you'll find a ton more options and you're more likely to find a deal when it comes to the 3DS. The Vita has pricing that's really all over the place, while the 3DS has it they're fairly consistent. You can get the original launch 3DS with a charger for around $80. But the Vita could be anywhere from, if you want the OLED model, anywhere from seemingly $89, basically $90, to upwards of $200, $250. So there's a lot more price fluctuation when it comes to the Vitas, mainly because the supply goes from having a lot to having a little to a lot having a little. Purely because the Vita did not do as well as the 3DS. And with 3DSs, there's just a more constant supply of those, purely based on the fact that the 3DS sold nearly 80 million units or some shit like that. So on a strictly price, availability of the product, it makes the most sense that the 3DS might be more apparently available. But if you want to say which one's better, which one would be the cheaper choice, I would say the 3DS, but realistically, you can find them both around the same price, depending on the model of each of them you want. So I would say it's a tie in terms of availability and price. Before we move on to our final section, I just want to say real quick that you should become a member. We're going to be uploading member-only content very soon. We're going to do Q&As, all sorts of stuff like that, and you should become a member today. There's 2 pricing tiers. There's $3 and $5 tiers, and yeah, that's so just you should become a member today. Back to the main content. The final section that we're really going to go over is usability and ease of hacking. If you were, let's say you just bought a Vita or a 3DS and you just want to immediately, I bought it, let's hack it. For a newcomer to start hacking or homebrewing their device, the easiest one to go with, I would probably say at right now, is the Vita. They're straight up just a website that you can go to on the web browser and just push one button and it starts hacking the Vita for you. I wish that was a thing when I first started hacking, homebrewing my Vita. It was so hard. I had to go through so many times of downgrading my system, and when I eventually got an ST to Vita, I had to almost redo the entire process, maybe losing all my game saves. It was a whole ordeal. Nowadays, the 3DS hacking is still getting easier and easier as time goes on, but as of right now, the Vita is just so easy to homebrew. So easy to get your fingers in and just start tearing that bitch apart and uploading your own shit to it. But one of the many downsides of the Vita is that it has proprietary memory cards, which can be astronomical in price. I remember spending $70 on a 32 gigabyte card, 32 gigabyte Vita memory card, which is ridiculous. And I think I absolutely got fleeced on that though, but it's brutal for Vita memory cards. It's almost essential to homebrew your Vita to be able to use an ST to Vita adapter and never actually put any physical Vita games in, which is massively unfortunate for those who like having a physical library. But at this point, Vita games are also absurdly expensive, versus the 3DS uses normal microSD cards. And then on the original 3DS, they use full-size SD cards, but most microSD cards come with microSD to full-size adapters, so that's not a big deal at all. So, towards the end of this video, honestly, if I had to decide, if I didn't have any of the devices I do now, and I had to pick between the Vita or the 3DS, strictly based on something like their libraries, I would say the 3DS, but if you care more about emulation, go for the Vita. The Vita is arguably a much better experience for emulation. If you like emulation, but that's not your main thing, get the 3DS. It has the much better, first-party library versus actual level of emulation you can do. So I think those are the 2 groups of people that should probably purchase these devices. If you like emulation and that's why you're considering these 2 devices, get the Vita. If emulation is only the second thing you want to do, get the 3DS. You'll have a much funnier experience that way. So yeah, that's the video. What are your thoughts? Which one would you get, the Vita or the 3DS? Leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, and concerns about what would you do. I'm always down in the comments replying and stuff. And don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, or all that other social media garbage down below. And don't forget to become a member today. See you later, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Deuces.